When Marcus pulled into his driveway that crisp Saturday morning, he felt something he hadn't in months. Peace. The sky was clear, the birds were back on the fence line, and for once he thought maybe, just maybe, things were finally calming down. But then he saw it. A bright yellow paper, taped right in the center of his front door. It fluttered in the wind like a warning flag. He stepped closer, heart tightening with every step. The black letters were stamped in bold, harsh ink. Notice of eviction. For a moment he just stood there, staring. The world around him blurred. This was his home. His name was on the deed. He'd saved every extra dollar, worked overtime, and spent years building it up, from bare land to a warm living space. Every inch of it carried his sweat and pride. And now, someone was trying to take it away? A voice broke the silence behind him. "Well, it's about time you saw it," Karen Whitfield called out, her tone smug and cutting. She stood across the street, manicured hand resting on her hip, sunglasses glinting. She was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. HOA president, rule enforcer, and self-proclaimed protector of standards. Marcus turned slowly. "What is this, Karen?" he asked, voice low. She smiled, that fake polished smile that never reached her eyes. "It's an eviction notice. You've had plenty of warnings. Your fence isn't regulation height, your paint isn't approved by the board, and frankly," she paused, tilting her head, "you've never really fit the image of this community." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean I don't fit your image?" Karen shrugged. "The board agreed. You've been voted out." Voted out. Like this was some private club. Like he hadn't bought the land himself. He crumpled the notice in his hand. "You can't evict me, Karen. You don't own this place, I do." She raised an eyebrow. "We'll see what the court says." Marcus watched her walk away, her heels tapping against the sidewalk, echoing like a threat. For the first time since moving in, his home didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a battlefield. And as the sun sank behind the rooftops, Marcus knew this wasn't just about property lines or rules. This was about power. And he wasn't backing down. The days that followed felt like living under surveillance. Every time Marcus stepped outside, Karen's blinds would twitch. Her silver SUV always seemed to circle the block a little too slowly. Her phone camera pointed just enough to make him uneasy. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was hunting for reasons. It started small. A warning email about noise violations after his nephew visited. Then a complaint about his mailbox being too close to the curb. He fixed both within hours. But that didn't stop her. One morning, he woke up to the sound of a tow truck. His car, his pride and joy, was halfway lifted off the driveway. He ran out, waving his arms. "Hey, what are you doing?" The driver shrugged. "Ma'am from the HOA said you were violating parking rules." "Ma'am from the HOA?" Marcus repeated, glaring toward Karen's house. Sure enough, she stood there in her robe, coffee cup in hand, pretending to look surprised. "This is my property," he shouted. "You can't touch my car." The driver hesitated, then dropped it back down and left. Karen smiled faintly, then disappeared inside. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at the pile of notices and emails that had taken over his life. Every single one had Karen's name on it. Non-compliance. Failure to adhere. Immediate action required. But there was no rule he hadn't followed. No line he'd crossed except existing where she didn't want him. A week later, things escalated. At 10 p.m., flashing lights lit up his windows. Police. 2 officers walked up his driveway, hands resting on their holsters. "Sir," one said, "we got a report of suspicious activity here." Marcus swallowed hard. "This is my house. I live here." Behind them, Karen's voice cut through the night. "That's him. He's been trespassing for weeks. He's not supposed to be here." The officers exchanged glances. Marcus showed them his ID, the property deed, everything. Eventually, they left. But the damage was done. His neighbors had watched the whole thing. The next morning, Marcus made a decision. Enough was enough. He called a lawyer. He started documenting everything, every message, every false report, every word. Karen wanted a war. Marcus was done running. It was time to fight back. And this time he wasn't alone. The courthouse smelled like old paper and tension. Marcus sat in the front row, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. He'd barely slept the night before. Every nerve in his body told him this wasn't just about an eviction. It was about dignity. Karen arrived late, strutting in like she owned the place. Her hair was perfectly done, her pearl earrings catching the light as she whispered something to her lawyer. A tall man in a sharp gray suit who looked far too confident for someone defending a lie. When the hearing began, Karen's lawyer spoke first. His tone was cold, rehearsed. "Your Honor," he said, "Mr. Davis has violated numerous HOA regulations. Unauthorized paint color. Structural modifications. Non-compliance with landscaping standards. The association had no choice but to enforce the bylaws." Marcus sat still, calm, but his chest burned. The judge glanced over at him. "Mr. Davis, you'll have your chance to respond." When his lawyer stood, her voice carried strength. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "this case isn't about bylaws. It's about abuse of authority. It's about one woman's personal vendetta against a homeowner who did nothing wrong." She walked forward, laying a stack of folders on the judge's desk. "These are emails and internal messages from the HOA president, Ms. Whitfield, sent over the last 6 months." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Marcus watched as page after page flashed on the screen beside the courtroom bench. Karen's words. Her real words. "Keep an eye on him. He doesn't fit this neighborhood. I'll make sure he regrets moving in." And the worst, a late-night message to another board member that made the room gasp aloud. "Once he's gone, we can finally make this street look the way it should." Karen's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Whitfield, did you write these?" Karen stammered. Those were taken out of context." The judge held up a hand. "Enough." His voice cut through the silence. You could feel the weight in that room. Decades of injustice, condensed into one moment of truth. And in that instant, Marcus knew. The tide had finally turned. The silence after the judge's words felt heavy, like the whole courtroom had forgotten how to breathe. Karen's confidence crumbled right there at the defense table. Her posture sagged, her hands trembled, and that smug expression she always wore? Gone. The judge slowly removed his glasses and placed them on the desk. His tone was measured, but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Ms. Whitfield, what I've read here isn't a misunderstanding. It's a pattern of harassment, racially motivated, deliberate, and unlawful." Karen swallowed hard, whispering something to her lawyer, but he just stared down at his papers, refusing to meet her eyes. The judge continued, voice rising with every word. "You used your position as HOA president to target, intimidate, and publicly humiliate a homeowner who is fully compliant with every rule. You weaponized authority to pursue personal bias, and this court will not stand for it." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. A few people from the neighborhood sat in the back, whispering to each other. You could see the shock on their faces, realizing the woman they once voted for was exactly what Marcus had claimed all along. Karen finally tried to speak, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, I never meant to." The judge raised a hand. "Save it." His tone was cold now, final. "You filed an unlawful eviction notice. You fabricated violations. And you endangered this man's safety by making false police reports." Karen's mouth hung open. Her lawyer quietly packed his bag. Then the judge turned toward Marcus, eyes softening slightly. "Mr. Davis," he said, "this case is dismissed, effective immediately. Your ownership of your property is not in question. And furthermore," he paused, letting the moment sink in, "this court is ordering a formal investigation into the conduct of Ms. Whitfield and the HOA board under federal housing discrimination statutes." The courtroom erupted. Reporters started scribbling, neighbors whispered louder, and Karen just froze. Marcus sat still for a moment, his breath shaking. He'd imagined this scene so many times. Justice, truth, vindication. But now that it was real, he felt tears welling up behind his eyes. The judge nodded to him respectfully. "You have every right to live in peace, Mr. Davis." That right was never hers to take. For the first time in months, Marcus smiled, not out of pride, but relief. The fight was finally over. A week later, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, lighter. For the first time in months, Marcus could open his blinds without feeling watched. The air itself felt new, like the tension that once clung to every fence and mailbox had finally lifted. The HOA board moved fast after the court ruling. Karen Whitfield was officially removed as president. Her nameplate, the one she'd proudly hung on the office door, was taken down. The new board members voted to issue a public apology, and for the first time, Marcus saw accountability where arrogance once stood. Karen's house sat dark for days. Curtains drawn. No more SUVs parked out front. No more rule reminders slipped into people's mailboxes. She'd vanished, quietly, almost shamefully. One afternoon, Marcus stood on his porch, watching the sun dip low behind the rooftops. The same spot where she once shouted at him, humiliated him. Now it was silent. Peaceful. Neighbors began to stop by one. "Hey, Marcus," one of them said awkwardly, holding out a hand. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. We should have spoken up sooner." Marcus nodded. "It's all right. You see people's true colors when things get dark." A few others joined, offering handshakes, kind words, even smiles that finally seemed genuine. The neighborhood that once turned its back on him was beginning to turn toward him. Later that night, Marcus sat in his living room, staring at the framed court document hanging on the wall. It wasn't about victory. It was about proof. Proof that standing up for yourself, even when you're outnumbered, can change everything. He ran his hand over the wooden table. The same one where he'd sat months ago, buried in letters, complaints, and threats. Now it was clean, peaceful. His home was his again. He thought back to something his father used to say, "A man's peace is sacred. Don't let anyone take it. Not for a title, not for fear." Marcus smiled softly. The war was over, but the lesson would stay. As he watched the sunset fade into night, he whispered, "This house stood through the storm. So did I." And to everyone watching, he'd say this: if this story moved you, share it. Because no one should ever have to fight to prove they belong in their own home. And remember, truth always finds its way out.